Michigan, Dearborn, to speak to us today. And her topic, as you would see, is nuclear families and challenges of motherhood. And I'm going to read just a short bio about her so you would know what a distinguished scholar we're getting to lecture to you free of cost. She received her doctorate in sociology in 1989 from Jamia Millia, which is a central university in New Delhi, England. And she started her career as an assistant professor there in 1988. And she moved to the United States in 1995 and has been teaching, was teaching at Wayne State University in Detroit, the sociology department, until very recently when she moved to the University of Michigan at Dearborn. Her research interests have been social transformation, minorities, and the intra-ethnic differences among minorities. Her first book, entitled Muslim Society in Transition, a case study of Hyderabad, was published in 1990 and then again in 1992. That book focuses on the ethnic Muslim community in Hyderabad, India. It is a study of social changes and adjustments that followed the independence of India, the oil boom in the Middle East, and their impact upon that Muslim society. Her research interest in that community led her to study them as immigrants to the American society. And then she did a project comparing Hyderabadi Muslims here to their U.S. counterparts, here in the U.S. to their counterparts in India. That is when she developed interest in studying other immigrants and their paces and patterns of acculturation in America. And since she was an immigrant herself and experiencing challenges of immigration and acculturation, parenting and family dynamics, she turned to applied sociology, which is her current major interest now. She has been affiliated with various social service agencies as an acculturation specialist and designed acculturation workshops for schools, Head Start programs, and health and human services agencies. Her experience of working with 6 different immigrant groups, including Arabic, Bosnian, Bangladeshi, Chaldean, Indian, and Pakistani, led to her publication of a chapter entitled Mainstreaming Immigrant Children Through Parallel Socialization Workshops. And that is published in the Hayes and Tuck's edited book, Voices of Diversity, which is a chapter which talks about acculturation workshops, their challenges and outcomes. As director of the Humanities Center, I can't close this introduction without expressing my heartfelt thanks to Professor Javed, who has been a firm supporter of our programs throughout her stay here at Wayne State. This is going to be her 7th Brown Bag talk. She started giving Brown Bag talks in 2006, and she has given a talk every year. This talk is going to continue her streak. She's talking today on the topic I read at the beginning, and I'm hoping that she will continue to volunteer to give talks in our series, even though she is no longer at Wayne State University. She'll probably be able to bring some of her students over so that they can integrate with Wayne State University and spread her interest that way. So please help me to welcome to the podium Professor Arifa Javed. Before I do though, I want to mention that among her major compliments is that she she has produced a movie, a documentary entitled Essential Arrivals, Michigan's 21st Century Indian Immigrants. And this is a movie, a documentary that has premiered in several places. It premiered in Mumbai, in the Cine International Film Festival in October 2014, and then in the East Lansing Film Festival in November of that year. It was also screened in New Delhi, and it has been screened twice at the University of Michigan Dearborn. So in addition to as a scholar, she's also a movie maker and a documentary maker. And I'm hoping that she would be kind enough to let the Humanities Center have a copy of that movie, because we would be very proud to show it. So once again, please help me to welcome to the podium Professor Arifa Javed.
Thank you, Professor Edwards, for that generous introduction. And I thank the Humanities Center to invite me and give me this opportunity to share my research with you. Before I start my presentation, I would like to circulate this. I just have one copy. This movie has become my third baby. So I carry this with me, and this is going to be in your library and the Humanities Center. Those of you who would like to read what it is about, just to educate yourself, please. Now with that, let's begin today's lecture. As the topic says, binuclear families and the challenges of motherhood. Now, today's presentation is an effort to understand how family relationships how family relationships in the larger society can mutually affect each other. Now, there's a growing trend of single-parent families in response to strained marital or cohabitational relationships. I put the two together because the impact on children is pretty much the same, whether it's a marital relationship or a cohabitational relationship. And you know, we have reached a crossroads where we have to decide how is it going to affect the future of this institution, or rather institutions. And when I say institutions, that includes the institution of family and the institution of motherhood. Now, before I proceed further, the whole idea or concept of institution that sociologists have, they're the standard accepted ways of accomplishing your social goals. So family, when I say it's an institution, it helps you accomplish your goal, the reproductive goals of a unit that are accepted. Now, motherhood is a sub-institution in the larger canopy, and I see motherhood and fatherhood as two cornerstones that make the institution of family strong. However, today I'm just touching on one of those. Maybe next time when I come we'll do that. Now, before I get into the presentation, you would like to know how I got the data from. This presentation is a piece of my larger research, which is studying contemporary family issues in America. So, family as an institution, and what are the pressing topics that we need to study and realign the definitions with the changing times. First of all, when we said family, for the longest time, family meant two people who are married Any other than that, in a heterosexual relationship as well, any other relationship was a non-marital arrangement. So with the frequency of other kinds of relationships, family sociologists are at the crossroads of redefining this institution as such. So this whole larger project that I had taken up way back in 2010, and I did make a couple presentations here from that data. So today's presentation is a piece of that. Now this is a purely qualitative study, and it is based on 90 family histories of individuals who were willing to tell me the details of their families. Now, when I said it's a quantitative study, it's a qualitative study, I tried to give them an open-ended question and let them pour as much information as they could around the topics I would be looking later. So the question was, it was collected in response to this open-ended question: describe your experiences and memories about your immediate family, including your parents, siblings, and your extended family, including your grandparents, uncles, aunts on your mother's as well as father's side. Try to include as many details as you can about marriages, births, deaths, divorces, religious and ethnic affiliations, education, and employment. Along with this, include a description of the macro context which you can recall in terms of what was going on in the society around the time frame you are describing your family. See, there is a micro and macro close relationship. What happens today in my family today is not just an internal dynamics, it could be a connection to externally what's happening. Job losses, wars, crisis, unemployment, all this does affect family. So that was my larger idea. Now, let's move to some of the basic concepts that I use in this presentation, and first being binuclear families. Actually, binuclear families are nothing but a fancy name to single parent families. When you say single parent, it looks like, oh. But when you say binuclear, it looks like, wow, that's an autonomous institution. There appears to be some kind of a power to it. Now, challenges. How do I see challenges? Challenge is a situation where you are expected to achieve the standard goal, but you do not have the means to achieve it. And then achievement of that goal becomes a challenge. If there's a goal means balance, maybe it could be hard, it could be easy, but it's not a challenge. The fact I use the term challenges, the means are missing. Now then I say her challenges. So in a binuclear family, her challenges and his challenges are a complete different story. If a family, a nuclear family, splits and the two heads of the households go a separate way, the impact on that part of the nuclear family, which is female-headed, is way drastic than the one which is male-headed. Now, obvious reasons: men in our society are better paid, have more stable jobs, they have a better way of getting remarried. 9 times out of 10, children end up with the women, and therefore women are more overburdened. These are some of the reasons why her story and her challenges in families, in binuclear families, are going to be different than his story or his challenges. Now, this concept of motherhood, there is a difference between mothering a child and being entitled to the institution of motherhood. Mothering is just the biological aspect of it. Yeah, biologically women are made a certain way that they can give birth to children, but that mothering automatically does not get translated into motherhood unless and until it's reinforced by the society as a position, as a status, something worth recognizing and respecting. So this, in binuclear families, the motherhood aspect of a woman's life gets hardly recognized. Now, the myth of freedom, it has often been believed that a single parent in a binuclear family, if she's working and she has kids and she lives by herself, maybe she enjoys more autonomy or more decision-making powers. Yes, you can have all the powers to make the decisions, but you need the means to implement those decisions. And if you are not highly educated, or you have that kind of a job that gives you enough time to give it to your children, or you can take time off as and when needed, or your skill sets are that highly valued, you are just not recognized in the labor market. In fact, you're competing in the labor market with men who have that more than you as a woman have. And even those women who are highly educated and skilled and have upper level positions, the biological responsibilities are there, which are never put as a burden on man. So it's a complete different story. And therefore, when you talk about freedom, I do not see that as a freedom, because we have left the traditional roles of nurturance, rearing and bearing children with the women, and then put additional responsibility of be on your own, find something and work and feed yourself and take care of your child. Now the best we could do is, maybe if women are strong and they pursue and they can get child support, there could be a check, but that child support does not get incarnated into a real adult that can walk the children through as a role model. So she has to do it herself. Now, that's why I see freedom as a myth in case of families like this. And then it is often seen as a demand for independence, so she's like penalized for coming out of that relationship. And then the gender roles. I don't know how gender roles are so unevenly distributed. In times when we consider we are the most liberated, we are living in the most liberated times of our history, but not for the feminine gender. Because as we just discussed, all the traditional roles are with her, and she has to prove her worth, being a 21st century, adding more responsibilities of breadwinning as well. So it is an unfair expectation and demand which the society has from women. Now, the question that I read to you was given to students of undergraduate level and see what they look at that question like, and they were free to pour their responses. So the most common things that I read in their responses, this was a 10-page paper that they turned in to me. Now, they see this as, these are the major issues they saw their mothers struggling with were, first of all, binuclearism started with some kind of any of these. First thing is spousal abuse. So the idea was not one fine day she was finally married and she says, oh no, I don't want to be in this marriage. The precursor was some kind of an abuse. And yes, women today are less tolerant to abuse than they were in the past, maybe because of the circumstances. So my argument is if they don't tolerate abuse and walk out and have a binuclear family, then these are the challenges. So where have they escaped? Then uninstitutionalized divorce. See, there are rules for marriage, but I don't think there are rules for divorce. The day divorce occurs, that's it. You can legally file a divorce, fine. There is a piece of paper that's given to you, and maybe that marriage license is no more functional. But then there's a whole journey of divorce that begins with, my B's and W's are messed up, please, I mean divorce for the week. So the whole journey that this woman starts with children is not institutionalized as to what next now. How are we going to do things? And that is a big pressure. Now, as a result, since there are gray areas, confusions, here, this is your divorce, deal with it and live with it, that puts women into some situations where they end up having multiple relationships, thinking that there would be a new partner taking care of them, and they have good hopes, and they were hoping against hopes, so it's a very, I would say, uncertain situation. And those multiple relationships are phases of adjustment and readjustment for the mothers, but they have a very crucial impact on the children who, in my responses, I've read that a child between ages 1 and 18 has been through at least 2 to 3 step parents. So that relationship puts a new adult, he ties his hopes with this new adult, gets connected as an emotional bond that doesn't work out. He has to withdraw that, and then a new person fills it. So on average, in this sample of 90 family histories, 2 to 3 step parents were in and out of a child's life between years 1 and 18. That's kind of an emotional burden for this child. Now, yes, of course, financial insecurity, there's a constant fear of making that kind of money to be able to survive and provide for their children. And this constant fear is in addition to what she is doing to keep that relationship in place with her own child, absorbing all the shocks of divorce and making the child cushion from the ups and downs of that relationship. Constant financial employment uncertainty. We've just come out of a big recession, and in any kind of economic recessions, you'll find people here are the most affected. So most women were not working at the top of our labor force. They were just getting by, getting some kind of a paycheck, and they were the first ones to get laid off or lose their jobs. And of course, we still continue to have unfair wages. For every dollar a man makes, yes, women still make 78 cents, which is obviously unfair. Then the lack of skill sets. They do not have highly marketable skill sets, and then they have a challenge of upgrading their skill. Oh, if you can get this, and this training, then you would have a better job. Now, when am I going to go out and get this, and this training when I have to work, take care of the children? I have nobody to watch them after they come from school. So it's kind of an unrealistic expectation, and they're constantly struggling with that update issue. Yes, in these circumstances, it is the mental tenacity of the woman that matters, because most women going through these issues have severe mental and physical health problems. Too much of stress, depression, and then when they have these issues, to add to that, if they're not married, they're not on their husband's insurance, and they're in jobs that they cannot expect insurance from, so they're in a bad shape. Yes, maybe Obamacare would help them out. We'll see how that works. But in the periods I've studied them, they were struggling with that. And of course, with all this on their plate, they struggle single-handedly, always looking for a companion to share. Now, in the scenario that I presented, sociologically, these are the 3 key points. First is role strain. That's a major challenge. And by role strain, I mean the role of being a mother, but against all these expectations and responsibilities, she just cannot just be a mother. She is more than that. She is a father. She is the provider. She is maybe a tutor, a driver, a nurse, a cook, and everything in addition to being a mother and emotionally taking care of that child. So that role becomes too strained. And then the role conflict, multiplicity of roles introduced in this situation cause a conflict. By the multiplicity of roles, I mean she is the breadwinner and the homemaker at the same time. And each time you meet a single parent, people think that, oh, she doesn't have to be bothered about the approval of another parent. She makes her own decisions. Single parent always means she or he is doing a dual parenting. In that given point of time, you are the mother and the father of your child. So it's like doing 2 roles at the same time and balancing it with your job and other conflicts. So it's not an easy thing. It's tough. And that is getting reflected in our children's success. Because most children stay with mothers in situations like this. And the largest number of children in poverty come from these scenarios. So in other words, we, the most affluent nation of the world, are raising our next generation with these single mothers who are doing their best to provide, but they're not able to provide the way they should be because of all that we discussed. So the next generation is being deprived of this. And with all the things that I discussed, I would like to say that, okay, I'll hold that comment for now and go on to changing gender roles first, and then I'll conclude with that comment. In the name, changing gender roles, in the name of new responsibilities, in the name of freedom, new responsibilities were added to the female gender roles without any of the traditional ones taken care of. I have been always curious about researches that were mentioned here and there, that there would come a time when men would make babies. I don't know if it would be in my lifetime. So biologically, they can't. So that's your responsibility. And then financially, intellectually, socially, everything, you have the ability to pick up new responsibilities. That makes her role overburdened and overstrained. Now, the sphere of nurturance is still hers. Younger fathers in nuclear families are doing a whole lot more than the older fathers. I'm not denying that. But then if they don't stay in, fatherhood institution is slowly and gradually declining in the younger generation, and they don't stick around. So motherhood institution is picking up more for what is being left behind by the fathers. So I see an overburdening from all spheres of life on this woman's expectations. And then, constantly they are being challenged to prove themselves at multiple strengths, prove themselves as successful employees, as good mothers, as good caretakers, have their own accomplishment because they are in the workforce. So where is it that they get a break? And there's always a fear and a constant insecurity. Maybe I'll fall flat on my face and everybody would laugh. So I see this as a challenge to their self-esteem all the time. Now, in this, the way the students reported this, there were interesting responses. Some of them were sympathetic. My mom, she goes through this so much. I wish I could do something. And they are feeling sympathy. Some kids were guilty. I wish I could do something, and me not being a part of that, maybe I caused them to break, or maybe I'm not bringing them together, or I'm not helping my mom out. So this is a teeny tiny mind, maybe as a teenager struggling to see how they can fix this, entangled world of adults. And then there's frustration. Why me? It's interesting, in all these family histories when I read, it looks like children have this ideal image of a mother and a father taking care of them. So their idea is, if it could work out, why is it that my family doesn't work out as a unit, as a nuclear family? So there were, expressions of that in their writing. And then there was a sense of abandonment from their fathers towards their mothers and themselves, that how could they just walk out? That was another parent on which they have relied, depending on when they separated. If they were too young to be separated, maybe they do not connect it that way. But if they had lived with their dad for 10, 12 years and have memories of that connection, then abandonment hurts them all the more. And then there were accommodations. Well, too bad this happened to me and my family. I will make sure that I would compensate for what my mother lost. In a way, they were preparing themselves to make the situation better when they graduate, have a job, have their life. Now, the last response was disconnection. I don't know what to do. There's too much problem in my family. There are so many issues. I can't focus on any of those. I can't help my mom. So I am in the dorm. I maybe go back once or twice a semester because it's too much and I cannot focus on my studies. And that's a fair response too. So depending on the personality and situation of each child in this relationships, they were trying to figure out their own response. Now, let's move towards conclusions of the scenarios I presented. And it looks like motherhood is not a privilege. It looks like it's a punishment. Too bad you chose to be a mother. Here you go with more and more and more until you completely fall flat on your back. There is this constant sense of being at the receiving end. See, family is a patriarchal institution with a head of the family being the male. But even when the male walks out of the life of these family members, it still stays patriarchal because the power and control is still with that male in a way which she cannot do anything about. That could be small little things as visitation rights. He comes and sees the child when he thinks he has time. He cannot be a consistent role model because you have no control on him in terms of making him discharge his fatherhood duties because he's no more your husband. See, he is no more her husband. He's always going to be this child's father. So, but she cannot maintain that relationship. And then there's a constant sense of being controlled by their circumstances rather than being in control after she comes out of that patriarchal relationship in a nuclear family. So I would like to conclude today's presentation by saying, with all that we just heard, I've often seen my students say there's a deadbeat dad. And you know what a deadbeat dad is, who doesn't do anything. And they've always said, sometimes so-and-so has a deadbeat mother. And my conclusion is no matter how negligent, how careless a mother is, she's never going to be a deadbeat mother. Because there's a price to pay before you become a mother, which is a very heavy price. Biologically, you carry that child, and you have a bigger investment in bringing that child in this life. Yeah, if he's an irresponsible father, maybe you can call him a deadbeat father. I'm not sure how people would see that, but that's how I see, given the circumstances, how women are putting up with their responsibilities of being mothers. I think I'm going to stop here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I had a question, and I guess it's probably based on my own personal experiences, but it seems like this study is surrounded or sort of framed by a particular socioeconomic group, and something that confronts me every day. I actually have 4 children, and I'm a doctoral candidate. I wondered if you'd studied at all the idea of like trying to balance, you know, people in the, I feel like it's a similar set of issues with me, just maybe different financial circumstances that, you know, when I talk to the other graduate students who are mothers, that we have like, it's like you have to do it all. Not only are we trying to pursue our higher degree, which is a little different than maybe working at a minimum wage job, although truth be told, it can be kind of similar. You know, how at GTAs we get a, you know, a stipend, it's small. But, you know, I feel like it's a different, and so I wondered if you'd studied anything like that with like the professional working or doctoral students, and this idea that I feel like you're talking about everything you're saying is so similar, of trying to balance maybe the pressures of writing a dissertation and teaching class, and even though it's, but then still coming home and still having to do the laundry. I still feel like a 1950s housewife sometimes, and I'm a feminist, you know, and I study gender and sexuality, so it's like a really weird thing. So I just wondered if you think that is playing out in other sort of socioeconomic groups as well, and if so, what do we do about it?
See, this is a data that I had no control over because it was a group coming from a certain background.
Okay.
But answering your question, for those who are in higher education and are gearing towards a professional job, how many professionals do I know whose careers have been ruined because of this dual pressure? Because, you know, you have a set requirement of publication of research before you become an assistant professor. Then a list of what you need to do to move further ahead. And a lot of women professionals, especially in academics, have not been able to do this. And there's a heavy price that we are paying, and it's a human force. It's, you know, a human capital. If they were given that opportunity, maybe they would have contributed, but they were entangled in this, and they end up losing that ability to be productive. And it's not them, the society loses their productive ability. They would have contributed much more positively. So I hear you, and I completely understand. Being in that upper level of higher education, the expectations from you are higher. And as you said, you are a doctoral student, so you are writing your research, your papers, preparing for your lecture. And yes, you get that stipend, but you have to be on all this to keep getting that.
Right.
So there is a pressure. And then the responsibilities of motherhood don't change because you are a graduate student.
Right.
I completely understand that. Any more reactions, comments? You are the, I think there are 2 people from the other gender, and I would like to see how they react. It's all women talking, and there are women sitting and listening to her. Let's see, what are your comments, gentlemen?
Well, to be honest, my mother died like 10 years ago when she had my sister. So I was 13 at the time, and he's raised us by ourselves. My dad has raised us by himself the whole time. It's been a long, hard journey, but I see the study as one-sided. That's all. I don't know.
Now, he comes from a different example where your father stepped in to be a mom and a dad after your mother left. So it's most of the challenges that I discussed were for women. In your case, they were true for your dad just because he picked up that additional role of being a mother too when she left you at that age. Yeah, so your situation is completely different from what we were discussing.
Yeah.
Well, my background is it's kind of unorthodox to say the least because my parents were like never married. They split when I was 5. I lived with my mother, though I saw my dad pretty regularly, so I considered him like an influence in my life, though I will probably continue to say that I was a child to a single parent because, you know, aside from support that didn't come until much later, and she was working a good job for a while too, but because I had like mental problems, let's say, that had to be diagnosed while I was like still in primary school, she had to like actually quit that and start taking lower paying jobs, eventually having to rely entirely on support. So it was going like that for a while, and it just became like it was basically a degrading situation. And I don't say it was like, and I'm pretty sure it was degrading for a month or other, but I talk about degrading and how it was like just getting worse and worse. We were taking like smaller houses to the point where we're actually just living with other people. First my aunt, and then we actually moved back in with my father when he took ill. So,
But he was with you through all this thick and thin, consistently.
I saw him consistently, but to call him like with me, I think would be like putting it a little bit generously, because that sort of implies that he's like had a more central or positive role than he did. Because he was there, but in terms of like struggles and pressures and his actual involvement, he was kind of peripheral. So, yeah, the situation like progressed as you might imagine it until it almost came full circle, but worse off than it was.
Yeah. It could be different from different angles depending on what kind of parenting you have been experiencing. These children came from a background that they made me read all this in their family histories. And, you know, family literature also shows that most men are not filling in their roles as fathers the way they used to be in the last generation. And that could be one of the major reasons for the decline of this institution. Like, yeah, you are a woman of the 21st century. You are independent, smart enough to take care of yourself and the child. But then it's a little too much, even if you can do it. Yes.
I know you study immigration, so did you also look at immigrant families with this study and see how that kind of changes? Because I know, like I come from a South Asian community, and there are certain like more, being a single parent is a lot harder in that like circumstances because there's a lot of taboo things in the culture and religion. So did you take a look at anything like that?
I did a presentation on that in these series, and that was stability and strength of the immigrant family. So there were 24 immigrant families, and that's why I studied them separately, because none of their, you know, equations were matching with the mainstream American family. And I normally study post-1995 immigrants. So they were coming out of their cultural subsets, and then in some cases families were stronger than what they were back home, because that's what you have and you don't have anybody to fall back on. And these immigrant cultures do not recognize social agencies and social services to help them. So long story short, if you want to see a parallel of this in them, then my findings were that they were too strong, too intact, and too pulled together. However, there were some divorces, and they also complained that the divorce rate in America has gone up among them. If they had stayed back, it would have stayed lower. But even then, it's a little better than the mainstream families. So having that connection and culture, but I think it changes in the second and third generation. Having lived longer and survived these pressures, I'm yet to do that. I'll see them in, after having lived for a couple generations, how that changes in Southeast Asians. Yes.
So second and third generations of immigrant families, that's what people, a lot of people that are here as Americans already are.
Yes.
You know, we're third generation, fourth generation, but our grandparents were immigrants. So is there like a trend in what happens? Even then, when they were immigrating, things weren't documented like they are now. Everything's clear now. Everybody knows everything about everybody else, and loud and proud. I guess with Facebook, everything. But things were happening back in those families too. Those families weren't structurally mom and dad and children. They weren't nuclear families. They look like nuclear families, but the more you find out about families, they really weren't. They were, well, this other man came later and he was the actual stepfather, and then they weren't documented. I don't think this trend has changed. That's what I think, that things have always been non-nuclear, messed up, and even, but they didn't talk about it back then. And now everyone talks about everything, and it's apparent. But when my grandmother told me that, and her family had some things happen, and in my grandfather's side there were things that happened, and now everybody else, there's always things that happen to make them non-nuclear mom and dad and children situation. It's like a myth. And the motherhood needs to be defined. It needs to be expanded, not as a nuclear mother. My grandmother told me you have to be everything. You have to be the accountant, the maid, the secretary, and work, and raise the children, and you have to do everything when you're the mother. And that's how it is. That's how, and that was how it always was.
You're right. If you talk about the mainstream that I discussed today, as some of them being immigrants half a century ago or so, maybe these were issues then as well.
But nobody knew. They hid it because they were embarrassed and ashamed.
First of all, it was
Culturally.
not considered to be discussed. So there were, if you want to call them single parent homes or broken homes, they were there.
Blended families, but nobody even knew they were blended.
But the idea was, if the large number of families were nuclear, we were like, oh, everybody's like them. Right?
Right.
So
More
there
than
were fewer
50%.
incidents of single parent families. And then, as I said, single parent families were not recognized as a complete family unit. It was like a broken home, so dad is not there. It was a big deal. Now we are struggling to have a definition of a family, even if it's by nuclear, right?
Defining the family as a family, even though it's single parent, as opposed to broken home.
Yes.
Because that automatically
That was
has a
a label
negative
there.
connotation in my, having a family. And I see that now with the young kids these days, they can have a family without one of the parents. Sesame Street.
So that's the big change in definition.
What if we could look at the different definitions of Sesame Street over 35 years for how this definition of family has progressed.
Yeah. Any
Okay.
more reactions? Well, thank you all for coming.